Hey guys, with Cataclysm and pre-patch just around the corner, I'm back here in Silver Moon with my trusty Fellhunter Shaman uh, to make another Destruction Warlock guide. Similar to the previous classic expansions, it's strong in PvE and PvP. Unlike the previous expansions though, there's like a pretty good balance between the specs in terms of PvE with each having like a niche usability and with Demonology taking the top spot over from Affliction and Wrath. So why would you play Warlock in Cataclysm? Subjectively, I think all the specs are actually really fun. They get they each get interesting new tools that I think add depth. You also have a big quality of life improvement with how soul shards work, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Um, every spec has like a niche role in PvE, and you aren't going to be embarrassed to play any of them. You do bring similar utility, although your soulstone does get buffed and Demonic Pact does get nerfed, being now shared with Elemental Shaman and as just a 10% spell power buff. So now I'm just going to go through like a quick spec overview. We're going to start with, I'll just quickly go through like talents, and I'll talk about the new abilities. Let's increase UI scale a bunch so you can see these. Again, I'm on beta here, so like all add-ons are I'm on beta here, so like all the add-ons are broken, so forgive all this mess down here. My LVY broke and all my keybinds and stuff are messed up. So the way that talent trees work, they're a bit consolidated in Cataclysm, and when you reach level 10, you get to pick a spec that gives you like your abilities and then your mastery you get later on at 80. Let's go over Affliction. Affliction like is very, very similar to how it plays in Wrath of the Lich King, which I think is a good thing. I think Affliction is like one of the most fun specs in Wrath. There's like a decent amount of depth, decently high skill ceiling and skill floor, which is nice. You still have your sort of like applied dots, and then filler shadow bolt, and then you have your drain soul. Although you do get like a couple of interesting additions with soul swap and stuff like that. Soul swap is like pretty cool. It basically allows you to store your dots off a target and then put them onto another, and you can glyph it so that it has a cooldown and will leave your dots behind, so you get to like double your dots, which is pretty nice. In Cataclysm, the difference between the specs is pretty small. It's not like negligible by any means, but they have different niches. Like Demonology is overall really good. Affliction is really good in like those multi-target fights where you can have your multi-dotting up, uh, which especially given you have Soul Swap now, which like reduces the amount of globals you need to do to put your dots up on multiple targets. Also get Soulburn, Seed of Corruption, which is just like really cool for your cleave. It causes your seed to apply corruption to everyone it hits. Your mastery is just going to be scaling your periodic damage, which is like pretty much all your damage except Shadow Bolt, right? So that's nice. You get 30% spell damage, and UA for specking. For Demonology, what you get for specking is Felguard, which, ironically enough, we are going to be, our romance with the asymmetrical pauldron to anime axe Soul Calibur guy is over. Akin Korak, I'm sorry, but you're going to be in the stable most of the time. Your Fell Hunter is going to be your number one single target damage pet for every spec other than Destruction. So this is really only going to be used in certain situations that I'll talk about later. And your Mastery increases the damage of your demons and also increases the potency of your Metamorphosis. Again, the sort of core of Demonology is not much changed from Wrath. You just, you're still like dots up, spam your filler, incinerate away molten core, and then soulfire in execute. But you do gain like a nice rotational ability with Hand of Gul'dan, which is sort of becomes like your haunt / chaos bolt low CD rotational ability, and this does like refresh your immolate now, so you can do similar things with snapshotting immolate as you can with like affliction and corruption. Big change here that I mentioned is Demonic Pact is now just flat 10% spell power, so you no longer will be like having to gear stupidly for Demonic Pact. Demonology doesn't really have like a niche. It does really good mass cleave. It does like decent low target cleave, although it's a little bit worse at low target cleave than the other two specs, and it has really high single target as well. So if there's like one spec that you had to pick to play the whole expansion and never swap, it would be Demonology. Let's talk about Destruction. For Destruction, you get Conflagrate just baseline at level 10, which is really nice. You get 25% spell damage, and then your mastery is like, it's a pretty simple mastery along with affliction. It's literally just fire damage. You pretty much are just doing the same play pattern of keeping Immolate and Corruption up, Conflagrate on CD, Chaos Bolt on CD, although you do get a proc, which allows your Imp's Firebolt to proc an instant Soulfire, and you also have like a maintenance buff with Soulfire that gives you a little bit of damage. So there's like a little bit of added complexity, and also, you know, procs are fun. The other, like, the destruction's sort of niche in Cataclysm is going to be your 2-target cleave, because Bane of Havoc gets added and it's spec specific to destruction. What this does is, like, for 5 minutes you get 15% of all the damage you do to the banned target. So you're going to have like Doom on your primary target and this on a secondary target, and it's just going to increase your damage by 15%, which is like obviously pretty insane. So any situations where you're going to have like sustained 2 or even 3 target cleave, like destruction, is going to be really good. In Cataclysm, balance is like decent, and player skill like matters more. So play whatever you think is fun, and you should be decently competitive unless you're in like a speedrunning guild or a world first guild or whatever. But if you're in those guilds, you probably shouldn't be watching this guide, because you probably already know all the stuff I'm going to say. That's the spec overviews. Let's talk about new abilities. At 81, you get Fell Flame, which is just like, it's not a rotational ability, it's just an instant. It has no CD, which is nice, so you can spam it like on movement. You actually do get like a useful thing to use on movement, which is a pattern over all the caster specs in Kata. They kind of tried to add things to punch movement less for almost every caster. That just deals a little bit of damage and increases the duration of your, like, you know, spec specific dot, so either Immolate or Unstable Affliction. 83, you get Dark Intent, which is going to be, it's going to be the cause of some drama in your raids, especially given how many specs can benefit from it. Basically what it does is, it's similar to Focus Magic, but instead of crit, it gives haste. So you link yourself, and both targets, you and the target, get 3% haste. There's going to be sims for this where, like, it's probably, I think the best is Shadow Priest, and then the second best is probably Fire Mage. If you want to put it on a healer, you're going to be going for Resto Druid, obviously, because they are going to have like 100% uptime with how many hots they generate. Holy Priest is probably a decent one there too, just because, although I'm not sure their Mastery can crit, they do blanket renews. But, you know, your casters are going to be bothering you for this, and it's going to mess up parsing, so that's going to be fun. The big new addition, which is actually, like, it's big in terms of our play pattern, and it's also just like an interesting and cool ability, flavorful, is Demon Soul. This is a 2-minute CD that every spec gets access to. So we do have an on use now for the non-demonology specs, which is nice. So what this does is it gives you an effect for 20 seconds based on which demon you have summoned. And we'll just go through these quick. Imp gives you 30% crit on destruction spells. Voidwalker makes all threat generated by you transfer your Voidwalker. So this is more like a soloing or leveling use case for this, although you do get it at max level. So, you know, it would be nice to have this while you're leveling for your Voidwalker, but more so like a kind of a meme ability. Succubus increases Shadow Bolt damage by 10%. By far the worst other than Voidwalker. Fell Hunter increases your periodic shadow damage by 20% for 20 seconds. So that's super strong for Affliction, obviously. Felguard spell haste is increased by 50%, and fire and shadow damage down is increased by 10%. So Felguard is actually like the strongest use of this. The other specs don't have access to Felguard, obviously, because it is a spec benefit of going into Demo. So you can't have access to that mode as Destruction or Affliction, but as Demonology, you will be using your Demon Soul with Felguard, and we're going to talk about how to do that during the pre-pull section of the video, given that you want to have your Fell Hunter out for single target, like we said before. The other new things added, we'll just go quickly over them. So the biggest change is how your shards work. So you no longer are going to have your bags full of soul shards. I ported this character over from the beta from live rather to the beta with like 32 shards. They all just disappeared, and as you can see below your character profile, you have these 3 shards. These are kind of like your combo point / holy power, although you're not going to be spending them and generating them in the same, like, with the same frequency that you do in like retail or later expansions. The way that you get these is with the new ability we get called Soul Harvest. This is a 30-second out of combat CD that heals you for 65% and generates 3 soul shards. So this is kind of like evocation It's our version of Evocation, except it heals rather than regenerating mana. And this is like, it's 30 seconds CD. This is really nice while you're leveling and stuff. You can, pull a bunch of mobs, get low, soul harvest back up. And the way that you spend these is, actually, the secondary way you generate them is with Drain Soul. Basically, if the target dies while it's being drained, you get 3 soul shards. The way that you spend these is with Soul Burn. So Soul Burn is like a 45-second instant. It's off GCD as well. And what it does is it consumes a shard and gives you a 15-second buff that like will buff the next ability you use, given that it's an ability that's like able to be buffed. So this will make your pet cast instant. It will make your teleport give you a little bit of a sprint. It will make, your Hellstone heal for more, your Searing Pain will crit higher, and your Drain Life will cast faster, but those are pretty much pretty less relevant. It makes Soulfire instant cast. So really the two things you're going to be using this for are going to be, specifically as Demonology, what you're going to be using this for is swapping your pets around, and also in certain situations where you really need that mobility, you could use it for a sprint. The other thing that's really nice about this is that, you don't have to have shards for like summoning your pets and putting your like utility things down, which is just like an insane quality of life bonus. I can't tell you how many times, if you're really on hard prog, you can, as a Demonology Warlock in Wrath, like spend all your shards and not be able to summon Felguard, and you're stuck there with your imp, or like you're stuck there TPing out of the raid to go get shards between pulls. That's no longer the case. You just can click Soul Harvest and get your shards back, which is really nice. So quality of life for Warlocks has never been higher. Another sort of utility thing is your Soulstone is now like a battle res, which is good, but it's also mitigated a bit by the fact that battle reses are now capped in Heroic, and also, casting Soulstone on somebody is a DPS loss, so just never do it anyways. You also have your Soul Link is just baseline for every spec, which is nice. Every spec gets that tankiness bonus, and you can also glyph it to be 25%. Your Infernal now shares a CD with your Doomguard, which you used to get from like that RP ability, or you'd have 5 people channel and one of them would die or whatever, or like you get it from proccing a kill with your Doom. This and Infernal now share a 10-minute CD, and they don't take your pet slot anymore, so you can use this along with your pet being out, and it also does snapshot your intellect. The other thing is your curses and banes. So the damage curses are now called banes. So you have Bane of Agony, and Bane of Doom, and they no longer take up a curse slot, which is really nice. You can keep Ellie up like in a 10 mana or 5 mana or whatever, and it's just costs a global instead of also costing that DPS curse slot. So now that we've gone over like basic changes and new abilities, let's look at a spec here really quick for Demonology. Alright, so again, when you spec Demonology, you get that Felguard, you get that little percentage damage buff, and you get your Mastery, although you're not going to get this until level 80. The first few talent rows, it's a little bit awkward here, especially like for leveling. There's only like 2 talents in the first 3 rows that really give you damage. Dark Arts is going to increase your pet damage, regardless of whatever pet you have out, which is nice. Here you could just get, I would get Stamina, and then these 2 tiers, you can just kind of get whatever utility you want. I would get at least 1 point in Spell Synergy, just because your pet won't die. It shouldn't die anyways, but Mana Feed is nice. It gives you a little bit of a DPS bonus with the mana from your pet's attacks. So you should always take 2 in this, and then you can just put the rest and whatever. Your Demonic Empowerment no longer gives a damage effect at all. It's just utility. So whereas in Wrath, it would give like your Felguard, it would trinket your Felguard, and then it would also give them attack speed, not just trinkets. And to your Fel Hunter, it just dispels the Fel Hunter. So this is like just a little bit of utility, 1 point there, and then you're going to get 3 in Impending Doom. The way that Bane of Doom works is that it ticks every 15 seconds instead of just every 60 seconds, which is really nice for not having to like autistically pay attention to your kill timer and like only use Doom when the boss has 60 seconds left. As long as the boss has 15 seconds left, you're going to put this up. So whenever it ticks, it has a chance to summon a little like imp guy that will just deal a little bit of extra damage. And that imp guy, I think, does benefit for your mastery as Demonology, so it's a bit stronger. And this just increases the chance of that imp guy to spawn. It also makes your like filler abilities have a chance to reduce the cooldown of Metamorphosis by 15 seconds. So you don't have like your meta CD reduction talent like you did in Wrath. The way you reduce the CD is just with this proc, which is kind of cool. Like the more haste you get, obviously, the more of these procs you're gonna get, and then the more meta uptime you have. So haste becomes scaled by this stat extra. Now you just have to get to the next tier. I would just grab whatever. Uh, Hand of Gul'dan, again, this is like your Haunt / Chaos Bolt short CD rotational ability. It summons a meteor that just does like a decent amount of Shadow Flame damage, and it puts a little circle on the ground that it's pretty obvious. It's like a purple blue little circle thing. And anything within that has a 10% increased crit chance from your pet. Molten Core, this is a bit changed, but now it no longer affects Soulfire, it just affects Incinerate. So even during Execute, you'll just be incinerating these procs away as soon as you get them. To get to the next tier, you just pick one of these utilities. This gives your Hand of Gul'dan like a chance to root and then stun afterwards. But for raiding, like your tank is going to be wanting to gather trash, so like there's limited utility to this, although there might be like some corner cases where maybe that 3-second root is useful. Next we're going to get Inferno. This allows you to channel Hellfire while moving, which is kind of it's a bit of a meme, but it also is the AoE ability you're going to use. It just looks kind of silly when you're in meta and you have your Immo aura on and you're Hellfiring and just kind of waddling around. You really do get to roleplay as like the most edgy Shadow the Hedgehog on fire. We're going to get Ancient Grimoire. This increases the duration of your Infernal and Doomguard by 20 seconds. Again, these share CD, so you're going to be using your Infernal on AoE pulls and Doomguard on single target. We get Decimation. This is our execute, same as Wrath, except instead of 35% health, it's 25%. So a lot of the executes in the game in Cata get sort of homogenized to be 25%. Cremation, this increases damage by Hellfire, and Hand of Gul'dan has a 100% chance to refresh Immolation. So again, like I was saying before, you can now like roll that Immolate like you could Corruption with Affliction. Demonic Pact, this gives 2% spell damage and then 10% spell power to the whole raid. This is shared with Elemental Shaman, so you're going to want to have at least one Demo or Ellie in every raid, including 25 and 10. This being changed to not snapshot off your spell power is a bummer on one hand, because it means you're not going to be getting every piece of gear first, but it's also nice because you don't have to make the choice of gearing between personal DPS and your Demonic Pact being bigger. We now need 1 point to get down. You can take any of these, really. I would take Master Summoner just because it's a bit of a quality of life. If you ever have to swap pets and you don't want a soul burn, you can just use your cast time is going to be low and your mana cost is going to be low. Also, like if there's lulls in the fight ever, it'll become less punishing to swap pets. Then you're going to get meta. So for pre-patch, we're going to have 5 more points here. So just like a super quick pre-patch build, I would just get 2 Bane and 2 in Shadow and Flame. So if you're just wondering about pre-patch, I would just copy this build here. But for 85, I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see this. We're gonna get 3 in Bane. This is just like your cast time reduction on your main fillers, same as in Wrath, except it's 3 points now. We're gonna get Shadow and Flame. This is similar to Wrath, where it's like a damage buff on your filler, and then it also causes your filler to put 5% crit debuff on the target. Then we're going to get Improved Immolate. This is just 20% damage on your Immolate, which is really nice. And we're going to get Ember Storm, which is cast time with Soulfire about 1 second and Incinerate by 0.25. This is the generic structure. There's also like a build where you just only Incinerate, where you don't get Bane and you get like those points in Improved Corruption and you just never Shadow Bolt. But this spec is just worse. I would never use it, to be honest. It's just a little bit easier because you don't have to swap between Shadow Bolt and Incinerate, and I don't know. It's competitive on single target, but anytime where there's more than one target, the other one's gonna be better. So I would just always go for this. Glyphs are gonna be pretty straightforward. Your prime glyph is like what your major glyph used to be, where they're just percentage damage bonuses to your main spells. You're going to take Incinerate, you're going to take Immolate, and you're going to take Metamorphosis. You might be thinking, why don't we get Glyph of Felguard? Well, because, again, we're not going to be having this on for a single target, and it's not even a attack power bonus anymore. It's just 5% on its, like, spam nuke. So this glyph is, like, really weak. I wouldn't really consider taking any other glyph, although, you know, hey, maybe you take... you swap to Corruption on fights where you're going to have your Corruption up on multiple targets consistently. But that's really the only, this is the only one you're ever going to really think about swapping in and out. Glyphs are also like have increased quality of life because you just learn them once and you can swap them with Dust of Disappearance. Your minor glyphs don't really matter because again, you're Drain Soul, like you don't need to get those shards, so who cares? They'll just take like whatever, doesn't really matter. Your majors are now like, the major glyph slot was intended to be like the sort of swappable utility thing where like you're going to be thinking about swapping these around more between fights. The thing about the Warlock ones is that like there's not too much here. The biggest one is Life Tap. This is going to reduce the GCD of Life Tap by 0.5. So you're going to get a super low Life Tap. GCD was just a little bit of saving there. So the DPS increase on single target and AoE, right? Because you're always Life Tapping. Soul Link is 5% DR, which is pretty insane. The next one is like, it's a little bit of a flexible one. You can get Soulstone. You can get Demonic Circle, although like I can't imagine a fight where this 4 seconds is like super relevant. If you ever need to kite anything, and just generally for like 5-mans and trash and stuff, Shadow Flame is nice because you're actually going to be using Shadow Flame a lot more. And it just makes it give it a 70% slow, which is like 70% is a lot, and Shadow Flame has a decent duration. The single target damage one though is just gonna be Shadow Bolt because Shadow Bolt is reducing the mana. This makes like 1 in every 7 Shadow Bolts free effectively, right? So it's just a tiny bit of a DPS increase, less life taps. So yeah, this is like the basic spec. And again, you can swap out, like maybe you take Soulstone for Prog, or I mean, you're never going to take Hellstone, right? There's no way this matters. Pretty much nothing else here matters. There's not really too much flex points. It's just like, what are these utility abilities you take? It's just like, if your pet is dying for some reason, you could grab this. And if you do need that, or you find a situation where that root is going to be useful, you can grab Aura of Foreboding. Although again, you might be like trolling your tank if you have this in 5-mans or like on trash or whatever, and your tank doesn't know you have it and you're just using it thoughtlessly. Your single target rotation is going to be keeping up that 5% crit from your filler, which is just going to be up passively. You're going to have your Fell Hunter out. You're going to keep your dots and your Bane of Doom on the target. You're going to this is like another little thing about Demonology that is kind of a bit of a bummer, although it is kind of cool because you get to, you get to engage in an honorable melee combat. Even outside of Metamorphosis, you want to be in melee range for Shadow Flame because Shadow Flame is actually a single target DPS increase as a filler. So you keep your dots up, you keep your Bane up, you Shadow Flame on CD, you Hand of Gul'dan on CD, and then you use your filler. So, in this case, your filler is going to be Shadow Bolt because you're outside of Execute, and then when you get those Molten Core procs, you incinerate them away. So yeah, it's like the basic rotation. Again, it's pretty much identical to Wrath, except you have that Hand of Gul'dan in there, and you no longer have to cast your Immolate. So the other thing to consider about Hand of Gul'dan is that the uptime on the little like 10% crit aura is longer than the CD. So if it's kind of like Haunt, where like even if you forget to put this up like exactly on CD, you are still getting some of that benefit from the 10% crit, right? So yeah, that's your single target. Let's talk about multi-target. Against 2 to 3 targets, you're going to be Dots and Bane of Doom on the first. Dots, and then you're going to put Agony up, which again, my keybinds are so messed up on here. You're going to keep Dots, Agony, and then if there's a third target, you're going to keep Immolate and Corruption. Ideally, you would be in melee with them, and you're going to be able to Shadow Flame. And then you're going to be you're going to be putting the 5% crit debuff on all of them, just using your single target fillers. Against 4 to 5 targets, you're going to be well, usually against 4 or 5 targets, it's like on 5-mans or trash. So you can imagine your tank is running in. You're going to be running in with the tank, and you're going to be just corrupting things. And then when you get into melee, you're just going to Shadow Flame and then Hellfire. Also, on 4 to 5 plus targets, if you have your Felguard out, your Felguard's like nuke cleaves, and it also has like a again, pet spells are completely bugged in the beta, so I can't show it to you here, but it will do like a little Blade Storm, which is, you know, like a decent amount of damage on cleave. So you're going to want to have your Felguard out for those cleave situations. And in like 5-mans on trash, you can your pet cast's only 3.5 seconds with that talent, which is nice, but you can also soul burn it out. For enemies that aren't going to live through your dots, although you're going to be putting those dots up anyways just because you're running in with the tank and you have like nothing to do there because you can't, if you're charging your Hellfire and you're not going to be hitting anything. So but if you're like on top of the mobs and they're not going to live, you can just Hellfire and Shadow Flame and Hellfire. Get a couple ticks in. Hellfire is nice for that because it does tick quickly and almost instantly. So like the perfect example of the short-lived ads is like Make Stun, Nox Ramus. If you're in the middle of the boss, right when all the spiderlings spawn, you just like let 2 ticks of Hellfire go off and get a bunch of damage there. So yeah, that's single target AoE. It's pretty simple. If you're at range, I would use. I think that Rain of Fire is going to be your best option if you can't be in melee to do Hellfire, but you should just try to be in melee for Hellfire. So let's talk about CDs a little bit. Metamorphosis is because of this talent that gives your fillers a chance to reduce CD. You're pressured now to just use your meta on CD as much as possible because you want to have it on CD as much as possible so you can reduce. So you're not like wasting procs of this with your filler. Although that said, you're still going to be wanting to keep an eye out for situations where like, maybe there's an intermission phase or like maybe there's an ad phase coming up and you save your meta to get like value from Immolation Aura and that kind of thing. So CD usage is going to vary fight to fight. Your Demon Soul usage will also vary fight to fight in the same way. Although it is like desynced a bit with Metamorphosis because it's 2 minutes and meta is 3 minutes. Although with this you can get them to be similar. The other thing to mention about Metamorphosis is that if they do not nerf snapshotting with like different gear sets and on-use trinkets with Metamorphosis, you're going to want to have like a full mastery set of gear and a mastery on-use trinket and stuff like that so that you can, and even like mastery gems in your second set of gear, because what you do is you put all that gear on, you use your mastery on-use. I believe there's a mastery on-use from Fireland's rep vendor that you can like deterministically get, which is nice for this. You use all that shit, you turn your Metamorphosis on, it snapshots your mastery, and then you put all your real gear back on before the fight. So that's but they're probably going to nerf that because they nerfed similar mechanics in Wrath of the Lich King with like swapping your tier gear around and like, specking improved armor and then respecking to the other spec and you retain the benefits, stuff like that. So let's talk about Prequel, and for Prequel, we're going to have to talk a little bit now about that pet weaving stuff that I mentioned a little bit before talking about Demon Soul. So your Demon Soul Felguard effect is like way better than your Fell Hunter effect or your Imp effect for Demonology Prequel. What you're going to do is you're going to start with your Felguard out. You're going to Soul Burn. And because this buff effect lasts 15 seconds, you can Soul Burn and Soul Harvest that 3rd shard back. You can pop your like Demon Soul, your Prepods, all that stuff. And then you can summon your Fell Hunter. So you get the Felguard Demon Soul while getting the single target from your Fell Hunter. There's a little bit of optimization here as well, where you can keep your Felguard out, keep that Soul Burn. You start the fight, you send your Felguard in, you use that Blade Storm ability that I was talking about, wait for that duration to finish from the Blade Storm, and then you soul burn out your Fell Hunter. Also, during the fight, you're going to be wanting to save your soul burns to swap to Felguard for that Demon Soul. And then, of course, to swap back to your Fell Hunter. So your full opener, again, it's going to be pretty similar to Wrath of the Lich King. You're going to Soul Burn, Soul Harvest the Shard back. You're going to precast something that will put up 5% crit, so it's going to be usually Shadow Bolt. You're going to be popping your Demon Soul. You're going to be swapping your pet. Then you're going to be metaing and putting up your dots. Again, that's assuming that the Meta Snapshot nerf is through. If the Meta Snapshot nerf is not through, you're going to be popping your meta before combat, before you cast your first Shadow Bolt. Your like precast Shadow Bolt or whatever, and you're gonna be you should probably just have like a macro that's cast meta and then equip your normal gear set. Although I'm just going in with the assumption that that's gonna be nerfed, because it's kind of dumb, and the play pattern is not very good, and your pre-pull is already complicated enough as Demonology with this pet swapping stuff. So again, you're soul burning, you're soul harvesting, you are pre-potting and pre-casting, you're pet swapping, putting your metamorphosing, and then you're putting your dots up and going into your normal filler rotation. So again, this is like, it's kind of complicated, but if you just go to a dummy and just practice this a couple times, it's really not that complicated. It's like a lot of actions, but they all sort of make sense, and it's pretty intuitive. You'll just do it like 4 or 5 times and you'll get it down. Let's talk a little bit about movement. So similar to Wrath, your main movement tool is going to be your port. If you've played Lock before, if you played it like, in the previous classic expansions, you'll be used to figuring out ways to use your port. The only other thing with port is that you can soul burn. And again, my binds are all messed up here. You can soul burn to get a little bit of a sprint. So if you soul burn and teleport, you'll see you get a little bit of a sprint, which is nice. It's decent length too, 50% move speed. So you can use that if you need to, although those shards are going to be decently useful because you're pet swapping. And other than that, you do have that new ability I mentioned before, Fell Flame, that you can now spam as you move for much less damage loss. So you're a bit more mobile than you were in Wrath, although you're far less mobile than a lot of the other casters like, Fire Mage or Ellie Shaman. When it comes to races for Warlock, I imagine we're just going to have to kind of wait until Sims come out. Although for Demonology specifically, I think Orc will probably edge out Troll, given that your CD lines up with Demon Soul being 2 minutes, and the pet damage is really nice, as well as that spell power being snapshotable into your Doomguard, which is something I forgot to mention in the opener section. You will be wanting to summon that when all your procs and your like potion is up and all that. Similar to Fire Ellie. Although I imagine Troll, Orc, and Goblin with the just passive haste are going to be decently close. For Alliance, obviously just reroll Horde, but if you don't want to reroll Horde, your crit chance passive for Morgan is going to be decent. But again, just like I would just wait and see for Sims on this anyways, but I imagine they're going to be doing like a deal on race changes when the expansion releases, given that Worgen and Goblin are added, and also leveling is going to be super quick. For your stat priority, this is an interesting one. So like I was saying before, if that snapshotting is in the game, you're going to be wanting to assemble like a full set of full mastery gear with mastery gems that's all reforged to mastery. If it doesn't have mastery on it or whatever. So that's going to be kind of annoying to get if that's in, but I'm assuming that's not going to be in. Hit rating is the same as it is in Wrath. You just need to get that cap. The difference in Cataclysm, though, is that we lose our hit talent in Affliction, and we also lose the hit debuff on the boss, so that's 6% total. So you actually have to get to that actual, hard 17% hit cap on every caster, which is a bit annoying, but particularly in pre-patch. Like, if you're in pre-patch, you're going to be wanting to swap on, some off pieces that have hit or reforge to hit. Although if you're playing Demonology and Wrath right now, you're going to have a lot of Spirit on your gear, which is now completely useless because your Fel Armor no longer converts Spirit to spell power, and your Glyph of Life Path is now gone, so you can just safely reforge all that Spirit to hit or useful stat. Besides that, you are going to be wanting to hit Haste to your soft caps, and then after Haste, you get Mastery. And then after Mastery, you're going to have Haste like above soft caps, and then Crit is last. And then your main stats like always going to be number one, obviously. Intellect, which is now spell power except on weapons. So your first off haste cap is at 21.4% haste, which is when you get a second tick of immolate. Like I'm in my like full ICC gear here where I have like kind of insane secondary stats, but you know, in your like in your first tier of Cataclysm, you're going to want to be aiming for that 21.4% haste. The second soft hit cap is 25%. If you're raid buffed and you aren't goblin, it's 1993 haste. And with reforging added to the game, you're going to be able to tailor your hit rating and your like haste caps like much more easily, which is really nice. In terms of hybrid gearing, you don't want spirit gear. Although if the spirit piece is like is high enough eye level and nobody else wants it, like there's no healer or hybrid in the group, you can grab it and just reforge that spirit away and it might still be an upgrade. Something to keep in mind for gearing. Your meta gem is going to be like the crit damage one, which is just, you know, it's like that for the whole time that meta gems are in the game pretty much. Your red sockets are going to be intellect. Your yellow gems are going to be int haste unless you're at cap, in which case you're going to be going into mastery. And you're only going to want a gem for socket bonuses if they're 20 intellect or 30 of another stat. That's like the heuristic. Of course, you can sim all this stuff and really get nitty gritty, but that's like a generally useful statistic. Although a lot of the socket bonuses in Kata like are designed to be worth it, so keep that in mind. And your blue sockets are going to be int hit unless you're like capped. If you're not hit capped, obviously it's going to be super valuable. For consumables, your consumables get really simplified in Cataclysm. It's just like super straightforward. You just want intellect. So you're going to be flasking intellect, you're going to be using intellect food, and you're going to be using volcanic potion. There's no like haste pot versus wild magic pot in Cataclysm. You just get intellect on everything. So that's easy. For enchantments, enchantments are also really straightforward. It's just like you get intellect where you can. You get on your hands, you get haste or greater mastery. That's going to depend on your haste caps. You're going to want to get spell thread in your legs. You're going to want to get like lava walker on your boots or precision if you need hit cap. For your weapon, there's power torrent and hurricane. Like if you're poor, you can grab hurricane, but power torrent's piss. So again, this is all just like simple stuff. The rep enchants from Therazane are a lot easier to get than the Hodier ones. You don't have to spend a bunch of money on the like little dwarf fragments or whatever. You just do the quest zone, you get the tabard, and you just do some heroics, and it's super easy. Also, the like honored, I think it is, version, like the blue version of the enchant, is better than the Hodier one. So even if you just get the blue one from Therazane for like your week one or whatever, that should be decently fine. Let's talk about professions here. So first of all, I'm going to say that tailoring is probably just going to be best for every DPS. The proc, like if you average out the average stat gain from the proc, it's like 120 intellect or something. The melee one gives like 1,000. It gives like really high attack power. It's not main stat, but it's attack power, right? Because melee, some use strength, some use agility. So, but it's still also like very powerful. Pretty much every DPS caster wants tailoring. Blacksmithing is also going to be your like second bis, because when the epic gems comes out, it gives 100 intellect instead of 80, which 80 is like the standard for every profession. Also for demonology, if that mastery snapshotting is in, blacksmithing will give you the opportunity to have mastery gems on a second set. You can swap in and out, so that's something to keep in mind. Jewel crafting's bad. Don't be jewel crafting. Alchemy is just 80 intellect. You also get your trinket, although that's more relevant for healers, but it is just like a decent 359 trinket for the first part of the raid, and you get your transmutes. So like if you want to be alchemy at the beginning, you can pay for it with your transmutes to swap to a new profession. Enchanting is just 80 intellect, decent. good moneymaker too as well, because there's going to be less people who are leveling enchanting, so could be able to make some gold with that. Engineering is an interesting one. If you have an on-use trinket, it's not great. If you don't have an on-use trinket, it's great, because the synapse springs, first of all, they do not take up your enchanting slot like they do in Wrath. So instead of like replacing an enchantment on your gloves, you can have the tinker and your enchantment as well. So that's a little bit like of a buff there, and also it just gives you main stat instead of haste. So if the average gain from the Synapse Springs is 80 int, but if you can stack those with all your other CDs, you know, like your meta obviously is a big one. If you can snapshot into your Doomguard, do stuff like that, it's great. But if you have a on-use trinket, it shares a CD with that, which can be a little bit of a tension there. But even if you have an on-use trinket, it's still decent. Although like for tier 1 Demonology, you're going to have like your Darkmoon card, which is a proc, and then you're going to have a second trinket. So if you just have your second trinket either be another proc trinket, it might like be worth to grab engineering. You also get a 359 helm, which is nice. Nitro boots, and there's a new tinker that gives you like a big absorb shield, have a high failure rate in raids, but they're still decent. Like Nitro boots, the failure is just it does like a bunch of damage to you, but you can just like Hellstone it. You have Soul Link to mitigate it. Like you're decently tanky, so you shouldn't really die from that, especially if you're not like in a huge high damage phase where your healers can't just chuck a heal on you. So nitros are still like decent. You just can't rely on them as much as you could in Wrath of the Lich King, because they can fail. Although we can mitigate that little nerf there to our mobility with the Soulburn TP, which is a bit of a sprint, like I said before. Engineering will, like most people, will probably be tailoring engineering if they don't want to swap their professions, and then later on you'll swap engineering for blacksmithing if you find yourself in a situation where you're going to be using on use. Especially like we just don't really know in how classic is going to work yet, with like how these cooldowns compete with each other and how like that mastery pre-snapshotting stuff is. Like if you're going to be using an on use trinket with mastery to snapshot a meta and then swapping, like that puts your gloves on C, right? So that reduces the value of gloves. So just some things to keep an eye out for. But all things considered, the professions are like very balanced in Cataclysm. You could even go like herbalism and like not be too gimped, because they made a big effort to balance them more. But again, if you're going to be going for like super bis, you're probably going to want tailoring NG, and then swap to tailoring blacksmithing. Inscription is just 80 intellect on your shoulder enchant. A little bit of added benefit that you don't have to farm Therazane rep, which is, you know, just saves you a bit of time. Leatherworking is 80 int from bracers. It's just, again, it's no different from the other professions. We're not a tank where we care about the stamina too much. Herbalism is 80 haste rating through Lifeblood, which is like a haste on use. So herbalism is not like a wasted slot anymore. If you want to get that for gold making, you can. So that's professions. Again, like Cataclysm, you just use unless you're like really parsing, or you really are like in a guild that's really pushing, just get whatever you think is cool or fun or whatever is going to make you gold. Now that we've talked about stats, gems, enchants, consumables, professions, all that stuff, I want to just give like a little bit of some gearing tips. If you're going to be dungeon grinding to like 85, I'd recommend just pausing when you can get to Deep Palm and getting the Therazane rep out of the way, because those quests, if they get congested, can be kind of annoying. All this stuff depends a lot on like how congested the zones are and how much they shard things. You know, how like buggy stuff is, all that. I imagine that like dungeon grinding is going to be a generally safe bet. I would just take a look through the reputation vendors. There's only like a handful of them. It's really easy just to go through and see what gear you want. You're going to be getting all of them pretty easily though, because you're going to be doing a lot of heroics, and all you have to do to unlock the rep vendors is like a little intro quest for each zone that's pretty quick to do. So even if you dungeon level all the way to 85, you just go back to the zones, do like 10 quests, and then you get the vendor. You can buy the tabard, and then you just go into heroics, same as way you did in Wrath, and you're going to get those reps like no worries. It's not something to be too worried about, unless you're really pushing, in which case you're probably already going to know a lot of this stuff, it's like not too big of a deal. Just level, get to 85, and get those tabards and jump into heroics, and you'll be fine. Darkmoon card Volcano is like insanely good. It's basically the new Darkmoon card Greatness, except it's for casters instead of melee. You're gonna want to grab that as soon as you can, as cheap as you can. It might be super expensive if you don't have gold. Like try to get into a GDKP or something, or you know, uh, get a job at McDonald's and make if you make $10 an hour, that's about the same. Not saying buy gold, but basically buy gold and grab that volcano. That's gonna be the biggest like freebiest thing you can grab, because you can wear that volcano trinket into phase 2. Also the Tolbarad stuff, like I would put Tolbarad rep farming and like the Tolbarad marks, whatever they are, I would put that like last on your list of priorities to get done. It's just like not relevant for things that aren't tank, which is nice because it's like a bit of a grind and super annoying to do all those dailies and stuff. Add-ons and macros, like it's pretty similar to Wrath. The weak ore community is going to be putting out really good stuff. They always do. Like when in doubt, just use the OG Warlock pack. Murphin does a good Warlock pack, although I think his is like paid or something. Just make sure you have like something of the basic stuff to like track your procs and track your dots and your big CDs. As long as you have those tracked and you're looking at them and paying attention to them, you'll do fine. You do not need to like have a DP tracker or micromanage that anymore, which is a little bit nice. Other than that, there's really not too much. Just like have your pet attack macros. I would macro your pet utility abilities and stuff like that. Have your information about your spells be central. Again, there's a bit of like doom and glooming DOA, Kata, like, Kata isn't classic, this type of stuff going on about Kata, but if you like Wrath of the Lich King, you're going to love Kata. It's just kind of Wrath, but better. It's better Wrath in every way except like the lore, right? There's no Arthas, there's no Northrend, but other than that, like the rating is really fun and all the specs are really fun, and they're not like too different from Wrath. It just kind of feels like Wrath plus. But yeah, that's the Warlock guide for Cataclysm. Thanks for watching. I might be dropping a couple more guides. Maybe Disc Priest might go over the other specs for Warlock, so keep an eye out for those.